If you need to know how I feel about Eric Dubay before we begin, the link is in the top right corner. You see, I like when people like him attempt to tackle the single biggest debunk of everything they believe, the space industry, because they are so laughably bad at it. However, this time Dubay has been lazy, and instead of doing his half-truth hidden within whole lies signature move, he's just outright lying and self-debunking. It's honestly kind of amazing to watch how unbelievably low quality the supposed king of flat earth has become. I guess all those Thai ladyboys have been taking up his valuable research time. Let's begin.
Take a second to honestly observe the
Oh god, I forgot how annoying his voice is. Hang on a second, let me fix this.
Take a second to honestly observe the
Nope, that's worse.
Take a second to honestly observe the
Getting there.
Take a second to honestly observe the following picture.
Alright, that's much better. Now, what was the Nazi yoga instructor saying again?
And tell me what this looks like to you. If you said a bunch of cardboard, construction paper, curtain rods, gold tape, and foil, you would be correct.
All I need to say is, take careful note of what follows next, and how Eric moves on from his first positive claim without providing a single piece of evidence for it. Yes, the Apollo LEM looks kinda rough from the outside. Is that evidence of literally anything? No.
If instead you said the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's highest technological achievement, incapable of being reproduced today, the Apollo 11 lunar lander, then you would also be correct.
Now that is a perfect setup. Without realizing it, Eric has just shown his entire hand with that statement alone. First, he said that the LEM is NASA's highest scientific achievement, which is wrong for many reasons. The first being, there is no single highest technological achievement. Different spacecraft are designed for different purposes to benefit humanity in various different ways. It's apples and oranges. Are planes a better invention than the internet? One could argue that the mathematics used to launch the Voyager probes on a trek first through the entire solar system and then propelling them out of that solar system using mostly the gravitational forces made by all the planets in the solar system around them is a pretty high scientific achievement. One could argue that figuring out how to fly a helicopter on a planet hundreds of millions of kilometers away, only 120 years after the first Wright brothers flight, is a pretty high scientific achievement. Now, second, Eric said that the Apollo LEM cannot be reproduced today. What this shows us, along with his two very lame memes, is that his arguments are going to be the same tired nonsense we've all heard and debunked before. The if they went to the moon, why can't they go back, which invariably always relies on short, out-of-context clips from around 2011 until about 2018. He won't use anything from beyond those dates, because if he did, he'd be unable to avoid the Artemis program. You can no longer ask why we can't go back, Eric, because we are. Literally, as I type these words, the NASA Orion spacecraft is being lifted and stacked into place on top of the Space Launch System, completing the rocket that will be used for the Artemis 1 mission. By the end of this year, or early next year, this rocket will lift off from Earth and carry the unmanned spacecraft into lunar orbit and then return it home. While that's happening, work continues on Artemis 2, which will do basically the same thing, but with crew aboard. And then Artemis 3 will land. We are going.
Most unbiased viewers would assume your average high school art class could construct this contraption without much struggle. But official NASA spokesman and astronaut Don Pettit?
Nope, not even letting you finish, Eric. Because I've already addressed this in another video about you. You're now recycling your own lines from the level video, and you're doing a worse job than before.
As NASA astronaut Don Pettit stated, "I would go back to the moon in a nanosecond, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again." "I'd go back to the moon in a nanosecond," Don informs us, "but NASA destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again."
So yeah, see my answer from the previous video. Don Pettit, astronaut and engineer, is wrong. I know, who am I to say that, but he is. It wasn't destroyed. I mean, it was mostly single use anyway, so it was destroyed during the missions, but The more correct term is decommissioned. The Apollo project was over, so NASA no longer had a use for the Apollo machinery. It wasn't destroyed, though. A lot of it still exists, as do all the blueprints. Over time, due to a lack of funding and any kind of reason for a return mission, it became obsolete. Yes, a rocket capable of going to the moon is obsolete. Why? None of its parts can be made in modern factories anymore, its computers are completely incompatible with modern ones, and NASA would never get permission to launch such a potentially unsafe launch system in modern times, especially not after killing 14 people with their most controversial program. Don is a very smart man, but he's a scientist, not a public speaker. Hence, he sometimes doesn't say the right thing so that the average plebs can understand it. It's actually less his fault and more the fault of those who misunderstand him.
Firstly, why on earth would NASA destroy the original Apollo lunar landers? The historic first crafts that landed men on the moon? The supposed most incredible achievements of mankind? And they irreparably destroyed them so that they could not be replicated even after 50 years? Could it be because they didn't want future generations able to visit museums and see these laughable 1960s attempts at high-tech looking space vehicles?
Remember how I said Eric's been doing some lying? Uh-huh. So here's the one from Apollo 2, which was never flown and is on display at the National Air and Space Museum. Here's one of the command modules at the USS Hornet Museum. Here's the Apollo 9 command module at a San Diego museum. Here's Lunar Module 9 and a Saturn V third stage on display at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Here's another lunar module on display at the Cradle of Aviation Museum in New York. And last but not least, we have the Saturn V Museum at the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex, which features a full display of an entire restored Saturn V rocket configured just as it was for those 6 landings. So, what were you saying again, Eric?
And what other 1960s technology is so advanced and expensive that it cannot be recreated easily and far better now than way back then?
And now he's lying again because, as I said, all of his arguments are from roughly 2015. We did recreate it better now. We're literally going back as we speak.
Let's take a closer look at this 1960s spaceship and see what else we can notice. For example, look at the paneling here on the side of the craft. If someone sheetrocked your house looking like this, you would be entitled to a full refund. Yet, with supposedly the best engineers and scientists in the world on the job, this is the kind of craftsmanship NASA provides?
I'm sorry, I fell asleep. Did he make a point about anything? Pretty sure he was just looking at things and deciding what they are based purely off of what he sees. Hey Eric, do me a favor and Google weirdest aircraft and tell me how many of these absurd machines look like they would never get off the ground, and yet they did.
What is this thing? A Twinkie? No, I'm sure it's some super important and necessary high-tech device.
Huh? What's that you say? Some kind of CIA microcomputer science?
Literally, dude, you sound like a confused old man. So there's a weird thing on the outside of the LM. I don't know what it is, and evidently neither do you. So what? Hey Eric, here's a close-up image of the inside of your computer. Do you know what this thing's for? How about this? Do you know what this means? This? What are these lines for? I'm willing to bet you don't know the answer to any of those questions, and yet it's all part of a machine that you use, and it works.
Here there are press stubs, and here also has press stubs. But here, and here, they must have run out, so they used gold foil instead. And then over here, they must have run out of gold foil, because they didn't bother with either. Look over here, at the evenly spaced lines of gold foil going down the legs, until you get to this point, where there is 3 lines right close together. It must be important because it's the connection point to the other crossbars, right? Let's look at another leg. Oh, no. On this one, they are all evenly spaced the whole way down. No 3 lines near the crossbar.
Eric is speaking about the lunar module in an interesting way that's exposing his lack of knowledge on the subject. Symmetry is to be expected on a craft that is symmetrical, but the Apollo lunar module is not symmetrical. Just take a look at it. It bulges outward different distances on different sides, making it look very unwieldy, but one ignores that this spacecraft doesn't operate in the atmosphere. It doesn't need to be aerodynamically sound, so its mass distribution looks haphazard from a traditional aircraft point of view. And this is not, in any way, an aircraft.
Apollo 11 mission controller Harold Voden was quoted saying, "The skin on the crew cabin was very thin, and that was all done because of weight saving. If you really took your finger and poked hard at it, you could poke right through the outer skin of the spacecraft. It was about the thickness of 2 layers of aluminum foil." Project manager Thomas Kelly concurred, noting that the skin, the aluminum alloy skin of the crew compartment, was about 12 1/1000ths of an inch thick, equivalent to about 3 layers of Reynolds wrap that you would use in the kitchen.
I love the self-debunks. You even had it in that quote, the outer layer. You know what that means, don't you? It means there's more layers underneath it. None of the outer layers were used for structural support. They were made for thermal protection and for slowing down micrometeoroids. Worth noting also that while the outer aluminum layers are quite thin, aircraft aluminum is about 10 times stronger than food wrap, and then beneath it is all of this.
Apollo astronaut Jim Lovell said, "Whenever I saw a model of the lunar module, it had these rigid sides and looked really strong. Turns out that external portions of the lunar module are actually made up of mylar and cellophane, and it's put together with scotch tape and staples. We had to have pads on the floor, because if you dropped a screwdriver, it would go through the floor."
Nope. Just not true. Jim Lovell never said that. As usual, Eric never provides a source for his quotations, and I couldn't find a single one aside from someone using it on a Flat Earth Society forum, so I call bullshit.
Apollo astronaut Gus Grissom even famously hung a lemon on the lunar lander just weeks before the mission started. The dictionary describes lemon being a word used to describe things, especially automobiles, regarded as unsatisfactory, disappointing, or feeble.
I hate when they use Grissom. Time for some uncomfortable truths and exposing of half-truths. Grissom placed, not hung, a lemon on the Apollo 204 Command and Service module. Indeed, he did this because he believed that this particular module was a shoddy piece of equipment with a lot of problems. And he was right. Back then, the Apollo Command modules used 2 things that were fatal design flaws. First, it used a pure oxygen cabin pressure in an environment with equipment that can potentially combust. Second, the hatch for the module opened inward, which Grissom stated was a terrible decision. He was right, because sometime later during the Apollo 1 test, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee were killed when a fire erupted inside the command module, and the astronauts were unable to escape. So, Dubay using Grissom's lemon here makes no sense whatsoever, because Grissom was using it for a vehicle that was completely different from the one that existed after his unfortunate death.
The lunar lander was never even once tested on Earth, landing here from any altitude before supposedly going and successfully landing on the moon.
That's a brilliant question, Eric. Why wasn't the lunar lander, which had specific impulses in its engine design for lunar descent and structural materials meant to be used in a vacuum, tested on Earth? You may as well ask why jet airplanes are not tested in space, because they're not designed to. Additionally, what he's leaving out is that every step of the landing system was tested progressively. First, the Command and Service module was placed in a high Earth orbit with Apollo 4, which demonstrated the ability of the 3rd stage to restart its engine and qualified the command module's heat shield for lunar re-entry speed. Following this, Apollo 5 performed the first test flight of the lunar module, demonstrating its abilities of its ascent and descent propulsion systems in Earth orbit, and rated the module as sufficient for humans to be aboard. Apollo 7 then launched crew into Earth orbit aboard the Command and Service module and returned them safely home. Apollo 8 then took the command module to the moon, with crew, and orbited the satellite for 20 hours before returning. Apollo 9 then tested both modules and their ability to rendezvous and dock with one another, performed in low Earth orbit. Then finally, Apollo 10 would do a complete dress rehearsal for the first lunar landing attempt. It repeated every single step of Apollo 11 all the way to 15 kilometers from the lunar surface. After this, it separated from its descent module, leaving it in an orbit that may or may not have destroyed it, and then returned the ascent stage to the CSM and reboarded it, and sent the ascent stage into an orbit around the Sun before heading home. So, with all of that said, I ask you, Eric, who gives a fuck if it wasn't practiced on Earth?
There, this pathetic cardboard and tinfoil construction allegedly fell from lunar orbit at 4,000 miles per hour, then used retrothrusters to slow it down and safely landed without a hitch on the lunar surface. When the astronauts did practice in other training vehicles, 3 out of 5 of them crashed, and you can see here how difficult they were to control, even in broad daylight, on Earth, in optimal conditions.
Entirely inaccurate. That's footage of the Bell Aerosystems Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, or LLRV, nicknamed the Flying Bedstead. It was an attempt to build a simulator for the moon landings and analyze piloting techniques needed to fly and land the Apollo lunar module. Neil Armstrong stated specifically that Apollo 11 would not have been successful without his training on that vehicle. That's Neil there, safely ejecting from it before it crashed. While very unwieldy and dangerous, the LLRV's purpose was to perfect how to position the controls and allow the astronauts to orient and steer themselves around, and it worked.
The idea that the actual lunar lander was never once tested on Earth, but then made a perfect landing on the moon, is one small step for lying Freemasons, and one giant leap for brainwashed mankind.
Sure, if you pretend Apollos 1 through 10 never happened, dipshit.
This is a 7,500-pound thruster. Look how powerful this is, how big, how much dust it kicks up, and the light it creates. The lunar lander's thruster was even bigger, at 10,000 pounds, and somehow didn't kick up any dust, left no blast crater under the craft, and not a grain of sand on the landing pads, as if it was gently placed down by a crane in a studio.
Or as if it were a vacuum-optimized engine operating in the low-pressure environment of space and landing at a site that it had just pushed all of the dust away from, hence the lack of significant material on the lander. In a vacuum, the dust flies outwards and drops, instead of lifting up into the air as it would on Earth. Additionally, why would it leave a landing crater? The moon isn't made of dust, it just has a lot of it on the surface, and the entire propulsion system was designed to be scaled back as the lander approaches the surface, moving very, very slowly by the time it reaches a few meters. Much as Eric said, the goal is to put the spacecraft down as gently as if a crane had placed it there. Safety first, you know.
Here we see the lunar lander redocking with the command module. This is clearly fake and made with props, models, and footage similar to the Hollywood creations of the day, such as Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey, created in 1968, the year before the first supposed moon landing.
Remember how I said Eric's getting lazy? Yeah, this is one of those times. He just says it's fake and made with props, but provides no evidence aside from a vague comparison to a Hollywood film. And actually, let's do that comparison, because Eric didn't. Here we have the famous Blue Danube docking scene in 2001 A Space Odyssey. Notice how the Earth is a matte painting that's quickly removed from the frame so that the audience doesn't see that it isn't moving? Now compare that to the lunar docking sequence, which is obviously sped up by the way, in which miles and miles of moving lunar surface is visible rolling past the camera with no visible cuts. I would love to know how that was pulled off, Eric. What do you think about what these VFX artists have to say about it?
Let's we'll see how long the shot goes on for. This shot is still going. Whoa! Okay, it just got way more impossible. When your camera's this big, you're looking like at least a football field sized stage. The ceiling would have to be so high and the light would have to be so bright to cover this entire area in an even wash of light, because otherwise you're gonna have a hot spot whichever is closest to the light.
Look at the jerky, unrealistic motions and lack of thrusters being used. The craft is just being turned like a Rubik's Cube somehow. All of this supposedly happening as they both orbit the moon at 4,000 miles per hour.
No, actually, what you should look at and pay attention to is how low quality the footage Eric is using is. How could you see thrusters firing when the RCS blocks are a single goddamn pixel? Now, take a look at this high-definition footage of a lunar docking.
On the top. Yeah, let me start right there. Yeah, Bird 34 enter. Okay, Bird 34 Your go for logic.
And I'll have the logic on for you in a minute.
Worth noting that, at that point, the vehicles have achieved relative velocity. When so close together and doing careful minute movements at high speeds, the thrusters fire only briefly and at very low power.
Since many people can't believe this is genuine footage, let me assure you, this is actual, official NASA footage of the Apollo 11 redocking. And this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to moon landing hoax evidence. If you still believe man has actually walked on the moon, and rovers are rolling around on Mars, please do me, yourself, and the rest of humanity a favor, and watch my following presentation.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that, Eric. You presented a ton of incredulity, lies, and out-of-date information. You need to up your game, bro. I'll be back for you. You're my new punching bag now. Now, let's quickly address the title of this video. I stand by it, but with certain conditions. Listen, NASA knows how to calculate this stuff perfectly, and what I want is for him to be sent to the moon in a spacecraft that cannot possibly take off again, and after landing, has only 2 hours of oxygen in the cabin. I want to give him some time to think about what he's done before he accepts the fate that he obviously deserves. If you enjoy this content, consider hitting the subscribe button. If you really enjoy this content, consider donating on Patreon, becoming a member, buying some of my books on Amazon, or buying some of my merch. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you over the curve, Space Cowboys.